Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. Starting at host this week is myself, Andres Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter at NerdNumbers. As always, I guess, if we're going to talk starting host, whatever, Patrick, we kind of rotate back and forth. I'll say you're maybe starting center. So starting center, Patrick Minton, who you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. Give a shout out, Patrick.
Hey, everybody.
And then I guess that would make you the starting coach, Brian, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian, the voice of God, our producer, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian, just so our list. Are you on camera? Patrick and I always do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm here in the right hand frame.
Okay, yep. So if I point at my DFSU that way, that's where you are.
No, so you're all the way in the left. Yeah.
Okay.
You're pointing at Patrick right now.
That way. Okay, so over that way, if you're
like
watching.
The worst version of the Brady Bunch ever.
That's good. I'll have to try and remember that for the show notes. Okay, so on the left, Brian Foster. Thanks for giving the chime in. All right, this show, not too much to talk. I was traveling a lot last week, but two kind of topics came up. I guess three. I'm going to throw the third one on, Patrick, as an audible. We were discussing it pre-show. So we got to talk Steve Nash, of course. He's been a favorite of ours forever around here. And, you just can't, when he announces his retirement, even though it's kind of been obvious his career has been done for a while, we're going to have to talk about it. I've written reams and reams about him. We also want to talk Noel, who's just a favorite of the site, and I know you're excited to talk about him. Patrick, you found a very interesting player in comparison to Noel, who we're definitely going to have to talk about. And finally, we've got to talk a little more Westbrook. It's not our fault. I guess what I'll say to Westbrook is, every time you get a triple-double in a week, we'll keep you on the script. I mean, we can't until you stop getting triple-doubles.
Well, it's starting to be like, every week it's like the blurb is the last players who had triple-doubles, and the list was long, and it included like Chris Paul and other people, and now it's narrowing, and like the people on the list are like Wilt Chamberlain and Michael Jordan. It's like all the good to great players have disappeared, and the other people left on the list are all Hall of Famers. So you kind of start to be like, okay, well, maybe this is really impressive.
Well, and also, I mean, what I'll give his last triple-double, I mean, I honestly think, like I said, I'm going to be egotistical and say this. I think Westbrook is doing this just to troll me, because he clearly cares about a niche blogger on the web. But like his last triple-double, he like only got 12 points and got like 16 assists. So like his last triple-double, he was just like, I'm just going to get enough points to get the triple-double, and I'm just going to defer the whole game. So it's like, Westbrook at this point. But anyway, okay, so on the subject of people who are excellent at deferring, I'm going to let you start about this, because we've just been in love with Steve Nash forever. I think he is one of the only players. I don't think we're going to luck into another MVP like him. I don't. It was such a bizarre set of circumstances for him to get that back-to-back MVP. And it's so amazing to see someone that doesn't get 20 points per game, whose primary things are passing, get that recognition. And so, we can't say enough. So you mentioned a good Grantland article, Patrick. I'm going to just let you riff on Steve Nash.
Well, yeah, today Grantland had a pretty good article about how he changed coaching, because he like basically he did a lot of things that traditionally coaches say you're not supposed to do. Like, he essentially made one-handed passing a trademark, right? He very, very rarely passed the ball with both hands, and often passed it with one hand. He kind of like, which it's sort of weird when you think about it now, because you go to a gym and you watch other people play and everybody just does it normally, but you do just super simple things like when you're dribbling and you're approaching the post for the entry pass, to just like be dribbling, and then one of those dribbles suddenly isn't a dribble and it's just a push pass to the post, and often catches the defender off guard, as opposed to a spot where you'd have to pick up the ball and then kind of move it around and then do a fake and a whatever to try and get into the post. And he basically broke the rules around the technique of passing the ball, and in ways that weren't, you can look back at games like Pete Maravich broke all the rules, but he was doing stuff fancy and flashy, and kind of often Maravich chose the flashy play because he wanted it to be flashy, but Nash chose the flashy play because it was the best way to get done what he wanted to get done. And I think he's going to be obviously remembered for things like that, and his trademark hip swivel move, and the same leg, same arm layup and for being probably one of the most ambidextrous scorers the game's ever seen, which is really amazing. And that's actually the one thing I want to say about Steve
Interesting.
Nash is we talk a lot about him being a great passer, and of course he was, but Steve Nash was one of the game's greatest scorers ever. He didn't score 25 to 30 points a game, but he was just deadly from every area. I mean, he was an amazing shooter. He had multiple seasons, with a higher than 60% true shooting, and he created so many scoring opportunities because defenses knew he was a deadly shooter and didn't want to just let him shoot. I mean, it's actually very similar to John Stockton, who gets so much credit for being a great passer. Everybody thinks he was pass first, but John Stockton created so many passing opportunities because he was a deadly shooter, and the defense knew that. So when John Stockton played the pick and roll, you couldn't just go under on it and defend Karl Malone. It's like no matter how you defended that pick and roll, Stockton was always a threat to score. And so Nash was kind of the same way. He was always probing, kind of looking for his shot. And when his shot wasn't there, because of how the defense was playing him, he was great at recognizing where the pass was to make the assist.
Well, we could easily turn this show into a clip show of posts we've written about Steve Nash. So one of the posts I wrote about Steve Nash was called, Brian, I'll start seeing how quick you can look up stuff.
Oh, we'll find it,
called the uselessness of usage, because I hate the usage statistics. By the way, anybody nowadays, stats.nba.com has time of possession and touches. You have no excuse to use usage, by the way, if you're trying to use possession, how much a player holds the ball. At this point in time, if you're trying to use usage as a proxy for how much a player is holding the ball for a player in the NBA right now, you're doing it wrong, just letting you know. But I was talking about usage, and basically what I ended up saying when you're comparing Nash and Kobe is the usage argument, and for those of you that don't know, just weird if you're listening to a show and you don't, is, well, some players have worse shooting efficiency because they shoot the ball more, and as you shoot more, you can't be as efficient. That's iffy. But the one out is, this isn't baseball. Like in baseball, if you were allowed to decide to pinch hit yourself any given at bat, it was a righty versus lefty, or you're not so good against the fastball and another guy is. If you were allowed to do that, and in baseball you were a 250 hitter, no one would say, well, that's fine. We can do that in we can do that in basketball. Yeah. Basketball, Steve Nash can go, well, I'm a great shooter, but I don't have the shot here, so I'm going to give the ball to Amari. And so, to your point right there with Steve Nash, what he always did is, there is never a case. If you leave Steve Nash open, he's got a shot. If you don't leave Steve Nash open, he's probably got an angle to an amazing pass, especially when he had the Marion, Joe Johnson, Amari days. It's like, I wouldn't want to defend against that team. I'd almost just want to tell the coach, let me rest as if it's a back-to-back. Let's just take the loss, and I'll play the next game. I don't want to get posterized.
Well, on the other hand, those teams played a really fast pace, which players love. Like most players love a fast-paced game because you get out and you can score and you can run a lot, right? And it's ironic, and D'Antoni's been in the news a lot lately because of the Nash retirement too. And I mean, I've always thought D'Antoni's actually a pretty decent defensive coach. I wouldn't call him, great or anything, but you look at those teams and you adjust for pace. Those Sun teams were actually decent defensive teams. But nevertheless, players love playing at a fast pace usually because fast pace means lots of points and lots of scoring. Even if you're playing good defense, right? Just because of virtue of the pace.
Well, it's also funny. You've talked this about James Harden, who's another one of our darlings around here, but not as much with you, which I love. It's not that you have anything bad to say about James Harden. You think he's great. I think you would take Nash over Harden, and part of the reason you've said is a huge part of James Harden's game, right, is he's going to get to the line 7-8 times a game, get 15 to 20 free throws a game. That's not fun. Steve Nash, though, was always fun.
I'm sorry, were you saying something? I was falling asleep listening to the free throws.
So your hatred of free throws is so much that even spending 15 seconds to describe them.
I think James Harden is an amazing player, and I just don't want to watch him play, right? It's like, and if I was on his team, I don't think I'd want it either, because it's like, oh my God. In his 50-point game, he shot 25 free throws. That's more than most teams shoot most nights. That's just so. And again, I'm not saying it's not a skill. I'm not one of those guys that talks about Harden constantly flopping. His ability to get to the line is definitely a skill. It's just a boring skill that I don't want to watch, right? This is like,
But yeah, Steve Nash though, like I mean, I love players with passes where you just go, "What just happened?" Like and
Yeah.
actually a player in the same one thing we talked pre-show. I'm going to see if I can tie this together. Was athleticism because Steve Nash, right, is a short guy with a mullet. He's white, obviously, which in the NBA gets you an automatic ding, which is stupid.
Sure.
But one thing you were talking pre-show is that he was clearly athletic, and part of that is just like hand-eye coordination.
Yeah, no, I
And
mean, like, and you mentioned this too. He's athletic the way, like, a great hitter or pitcher in baseball is athletic because that ability to, to see and react at incredibly high speeds is definitely athleticism. Like, it's not just practice, right? You can practice a lot, as much as you want, but if you don't have the physical skills, and by that I mean vision, eye-hand coordination, etc., you're never going to be a hitter like Ichiro. It's just not going to happen, right? And I mean, Nash was the same way. He had crazy fast hands and reaction times, and that's athleticism, right? It's not jumping and leaping, but it's still athleticism.
yeah, and I mean, I'm sorry if I make a noise. One of the things we did last week's show, as I mentioned, I try and avoid making noise on the show, but I'm not always perfect at it because if I try and type or, click a mouse, you can hear it. And what I actually did is I said click so loudly on a previous show you couldn't hear my click, which I guess was perfect. But then I actually confused everybody because I said, you're about to hear me click, and then no one can hear me click. But yeah, what I'm looking at actually, by the way, is yeah, you're talking speed. He still got, a steal a game. He wasn't fantastic at it. In fact, he wasn't even close to an average point guard. But it's not as if you can act as if Steve Nash could not get steals in the NBA when you're talking crazy fast hands. And when
Wait,
you're
wait. In
talking,
his youth, he got a few more than that, did he not?
he was about at his best, he was around 1.5 per
Yeah,
48, which
yeah,
and an average guard
yeah.
is about 2.1.
It's never been, never been his forte. He's not like, so I love the John Stockton comparisons, but that's one way that he is not a good comparison because John Stockton was a pilfering thief. I mean, he was amazing. I think he led the league in steals like once or twice, and he was in the top five like pretty much his whole career. Um, yeah, I mean, he was never known really for his amazing defense, but his hands are still really fast because you look at like he had kind of hints of that Steve Curry thing where he didn't need a lot of space to get off his shot. And obviously, he was a supreme ball handler because he was constantly meandering around and probing in traffic. Um, I mean, he's definitely, I guess, I don't really know a better way to say this other than that counts as athleticism too. It's not just all how fast you can run or how fast your first step off the block is or how high you jump. Those aren't the only aspects of athleticism.
Well, I mean, absolutely. Like if you go to a gym, for instance, you could see people lifting really, really heavy weights, and that's impressive. But if you like watch boxers, right, one of the things they do is the speed bag, and that's impressive too. And my father-in-law has one in his garage, and I'll occasionally hit it for fun, and I freak out the dogs. They hate it, but it's not an easy thing to do, right? You're
Yeah,
trying to hit something very, this
yeah,
doesn't take a lot. If people watching the video show, I'm just doing this. That's not that hard to do. That doesn't require a ton of muscle, but doing it really, really quick is not easy. But professional boxers can do it. And if you watch, like, that's huge for them in fights because they can land punches quickly. Steve Nash is the same way. I think we just, when we bring up athleticism in professional sports, and I wanted to make sure to give Steve Nash's due here, is that I don't think if anybody wants to say Steve Nash is an example of a player that wasn't athletic, that went on to do great things, I want to say he had athleticism that wasn't as appreciated as it should be, and he made the most with that. And there's a great book called The Sports Gene that talks about stuff like this, where it's like being able to hold more oxygen in your blood is a huge athletic advantage. No one's going to notice it. You might be 5'10", but the fact that you can hold more oxygen as a result, ski for much, much longer than everybody else, that's
yeah,
as much of an edge as being half a foot taller.
As Lance
yeah,
Armstrong found out.
yeah. And well, yeah, true. And in fact, it's funny that you say that because I was just actually thinking about Nash and Nash comparisons of these short white guys, and the current Phoenix Suns coach Jeff Hornacek was once. I mean, I remember reading an article once about him getting some kind of a medical exam, and the person who examined him was sure that he was like a professional swimmer or something because that person said your lungs are just ridiculous. You can hold oxygen forever. And when you look at the way Jeff Hornacek played, like he was just running around screens all day game long. That's all he did was ran around screens. He ran, and he just tired out his defenders because his defenders just couldn't keep up. Just constantly running around screens all the damn time, and they got kind of eventually tired and couldn't keep up with him. And Jeff Hornacek is like a classic example of a guy who probably like his chest probably expands to like twice its size when he takes a deep breath. He's got a huge pair of lungs. So even though he's the prototype of what, a lot of us would consider unathletic guys who succeeded in the NBA, he's clearly got some like amazing natural gifts.
Yeah, I love, like I said, I'll keep promoting the book, The Sports Gene. It's a fantastic one, but it's like so many of the skills, like the 5-tool player. We love the Moneyball comparison all the time where they talk about that. You're a 5-tool player. You look great, right? You have a hot girlfriend. It's like you're right to want to look for athleticism. That thing is correct, but you might be looking for the wrong athleticism. One of the big things in the NBA is wingspan, right? We've got certain players that just have really long arms. Dennis Rodman, if you were just going by height and body type, Dennis Rodman looks like this lanky, middle for the NBA, right? Because he's very tall for a human.
Sure.
But, lanky, middle size for NBA. But you look at his arms are like, I think he had a 7'3" to 7'6", somewhere in there wingspan. And for like a 6'7", 6'8" guy, that's absurd.
Yeah. Speaking of absurd, I just learned yesterday that Rudy Gobert has a 7'8.5" wingspan, which is just absolutely ridiculous. Anyway.
Rudy. Oh no, I absolutely. I mean, by the way, just in terms of just the random shout out to also, you get a spot on the show. You get a spot on the show if you just keep it up. Rudy Gobert and just his stat lines and the Utah Jazz defense, like for all the talk I give, because this is me, right? I give all the talk about, well, defense is a team activity and it's hard to quantify and da 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 da. I stick to that for the most part, but if you're going to look at like one player transforming a defense in one season, Rudy Gobert is that player.
Well, I mean, he's an amazing defender, but he also took a lot of minutes from a guy who's not a very good defender in Enes Kanter. So the difference he's making is probably a little overstated. But yeah, he's beastly. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say, do we have anything? I can go on Nash forever. Like I said, this is kind of one, but
are we done on Nash?
I didn't know. I'll drop one thing in, Dre. Do you
want to keep going on Nash, or do you want to go on to the next topic?
I didn't know we were done on Nash. So, like, one of the things that I think is interesting.
There you go.
One of the things I think is interesting about Nash is like how, like, people are really happy about him now, and they were all saying great things about him now when he's retiring. But it was kind of amazing how Lakers fans weren't very happy with him ever since his first injury when he broke his leg, and then like I heard lots of Lakers fans calling for him to retire before this season because he wasn't going to play, and it's like, why should he turn down what is it, 11 million or whatever his salary is? Like, why would he do that? Why would he just give it to you?
And he said, and as he said in his his retirement post or whatever, right? He took a pay cut to play with the Lakers. He had one contract left. He was still at a high enough level to where he could get, he's never been a max player, which is a shame, but he could have gotten close to that. And he said, I'm going to take a pay cut to play on the Lakers to try and compete.
Yeah.
And, so if you take a pay cut, I don't think it's fair to go the other way and say, well, you took a pay cut for us when everything was going well. And then, oh, by the way, Dwight Howard wasn't as good. And actually, Kobe was better than we expected. But, none of the other players played up to what we thought. So, yeah, you need to give even more money back now. That's absurd.
Yeah. Kobe was better than expected, but he dominated the ball in ways that Steve Nash was always a player who made teams great by dominating the ball and looking for scoring opportunities off of the dribble. And then when he didn't have those opportunities, he passed to players. And I'm sorry, but Steve Nash was always better at that than Kobe was, which I'm sure all the Lakers fans are going to love me saying that. But yes, Steve Nash was a better scorer off the dribble than Kobe was. And so, you want the ball in Nash's hands the whole game, not in Kobe's hands. So it just didn't Even though Kobe was still good, it's like one of those classic examples of, oh, okay, yeah, sure. You got a player taking good shots. Well, I'd rather have a player taking great shots. So
And so
stop it.
and I'm trying to look at this. So by the way, one of the things that hit, Nash's wins per 48 the first season in Phoenix when he actually played like half a season, was his assists dropped to 9.8 a game. But for the record, his true shooting was still up at 60%. And then I'm trying to scroll down really quick here. Man, I have a lot of respect for your ability, Brian, to just jump all over the place and look up stats and all that. Actually, this is, yeah, he dropped like 2 shots a game. So clearly, and I'll have to look for the show notes to see if that season is on the stats.nba.com, the stuff I just talked about. But yeah, clearly what happened with Nash is he got a lot worse, but it was actually, this is fascinating. This was the Kevin Love experiment in Cleveland, like 1.0, but it was with a slightly older. No, the issue being Kevin Love, a huge part of his game, a huge part of his success is if you give him a ball a lot, he's going to take a lot of good shots. He can still pass the ball some. He's a great player to give the ball to. Steve Nash is the same way, and he goes to Los Angeles and he drops in performance. Part of that probably age, but a bigger part is, well, so much of this guy's game is he's really good at shooting, but now he's taking 2 fewer shots a game. He's really good at passing, but now he's not holding the ball as much. So when I'm saying comparing him to Kevin Love, it's like if you're going to hire a star player who's a star player because they hold the ball 60% of the time they're on the court, don't then cut them back to 30% and be like, why aren't they playing as well?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Kevin Love is he doesn't need to dominate the ball, but he just needs the touches, right? He's not like so. Nash needs more than just a touch. I mean, he's a good passer, but if he was playing for example, if you put him at shooting guard where he's not ever like doing the whole thing that Nash basically got famous for, where he's dribbling around and he's probing the offense, right? That requires quite a lot of time actually having the ball in your hands and dominating the ball. Kevin Love is another example, though, didn't need that kind of time. If you look at what Kevin Love actually does with the ball, it's, a post move or it's 1 or 2 quick dribbles or it's what you need to do is get Kevin Love lots of touches in the pinch post. That's really what you need to do because that's where he excels. I have no idea why Cleveland isn't doing that. And to be fair, this isn't them misusing Kevin Love. This is what they would do no matter who was playing power forward, because that team just spends a shitload of time with either Kyrie Irving or LeBron James just dominating the ball, just dribbling on the perimeter, looking for an angle of attack. And as it happens, both of those players are really good at finding an angle of attack. But again, you're taking good shots instead of great shots. The team would be better if they spent less time doing that and more time just, letting the ball swing around. Run more plays where the first action is to get the ball into Kevin Love in the bench post. Just do that more. Trust me, really good things will happen.
And it makes me a little sad. Like I've actually come to hate Sports VU in much the same way I hate the year 1978, irrationally so, because it represents this gap in data. So the major gaps in data for those of you that follow the box scores like us are 1974. That's like the first upgrade to the box score statistics, but not complete. 1978, that was when the NBA got full box score statistics we use today. 1980 is when they got the 3-point line. So that's pretty much the modern NBA, despite some rule changes. 2001 is when they finally integrated the play-by-play, and that gives us shot charts. And then now we're going to get to add 2013, 2014, the season, because that's when they finally added Sports VU data. I just looked up Kevin Love to what you were saying, Patrick, and you said touches. Kevin Love last year on Minnesota got 87.6 touches per game. On Cleveland, he's getting, I might misremember this because I've got a lot of numbers in my head, but it's like 67.5. So he dropped touches per game by 25%. I wish, obviously, like I said, this is why I'm hating the data. We can't do the same experiment for Steve Nash. And usage, as I mentioned in that article, usage is a horrible proxy for this. So don't try and use usage to estimate what happened to Steve Nash's possessions per game. But I would love to have seen what happened with Steve Nash when he went with Kobe. Because, yeah, Kobe dominating the ball is much different than Steve Nash dominating the ball. And, I love hearing you wax effusive about, like, coaching strategies, like what you would do with Kevin Love. Like, I don't know what you could have done with that Lakers team with Kobe and Nash, because the obvious strategy is give Nash the ball a lot. And with with Kobe, I just don't know how you can coach that. I don't know what you can do with Kobe to say, stop handling the ball so damn much.
I think only Steve Jackson could have pulled it off. Sorry, Phil
Steve
Jackson.
Jackson? I was like,
Phil Jackson. I don't know why I said Steve Jackson. I think he's the only coach that could have possibly convinced Kobe that, you'll get plenty of touches off the ball, but I need you to really be a two guard and, not it's I don't really I mean it is a two guard that he's playing obviously, but there's so many sets are okay, let's dump the ball into Kobe, on the wing, and then let's run some action while he improvises. And it's like, given the way we know most of those sets are going to end, namely with Kobe putting up a shot no matter what the action is off the ball, that isn't really, it's often a good shot because of Kobe's ability to get to the line, but it's not very often a great shot because Kobe has, like, you look at Kobe's career, he's never been a 60% true shooter kind of guy, right? He's always been more in like 54 to 57 kind of range. So
he had that brief
do you want good shots or do you want great shots? It's very
he had
simple,
that brief
right?
period in his prime where he was pretty good, but he was never, as good as Nash. Like
I think
that's what we should point out.
Yeah, I just think that from an offensive philosophy, and I don't think any coach is going to disagree with me about this, but it's just the execution is like whatever. So what you're looking for is you're looking for a great shot first, and then you'll take a good shot because that's often what the defense will end up giving you. And then if you really have to, you'll take a mediocre shot because it's your the other option is to not get one at all, right? And then obviously the last ditch option is shot clock expiring. I'll take any fucking shot that I can get up. But for the most part, let's try to get great shots. And, I think that's what coaches design offenses to try to get layups and threes and other good looks. They don't design, like, nobody comes out of a huddle where the coach is like, okay, if we get a contested jumper out of this one, it's going to be a success, right? That's not what an offense tries to get. An offense is trying to get great shots, and then defenses, if the defense is doing anything right, the defense will hinder them, and then the offense will have to settle for a good shot or an average shot. And when you play an offense where your primary goal is, dump the ball to Kobe and see what he does, you're going to get average to good shots. You're not going to get great shots.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because this is the wax.
So you're basically saying, okay, I'm going to eliminate the outliers. Okay, I'm not going to get any crappy shots anymore. I'm also not going to get any great shots anymore. It's like, well, I would rather try and get those great shots, right?
Well, I was going to say what makes really good offenses really good, and this is what's really hard to do. Like there's, every business manager has these two books on their shelf. I doubt very many actually listen to them, but it's called Built to Last and Good to Great.
Yeah, Good to Great.
So Good to Great's really popular because Built to Last is like, here's how you make a great company, and everybody goes, well, I'm already at the company, it's already built. What do I do to make it better? Good to Great says, here's an example of a bunch of companies that made themselves much better than they were, and you go, what happened after the fact? And they go, oh, and then they screwed it all up. So I love that book. But the idea of like Steve Nash, one of the things that makes him amazing or made him amazing was the idea that Steve Nash probably could have had a shooting percentage better than Kobe's, but still pretty good for his entire career. But it's going for the better shot. For a fact that Steve Nash is like, this is a 60% shot right now, but if I get a pass to Amari, that's a 90% shot. And he was willing to do that. And that's a hard skill to teach in the NBA because a lot of times if someone's got a good shot, why would they not just take the good shot?
Well, yeah, and I'm defining good as like, 50s, not 60s, right?
Well, Steve Nash is normal. So I'm even saying that. I'm saying.
Right, yeah. I guess what I'm saying is, if I'm coaching a team that has Steve Nash, Amari, and Joe Johnson on it, what I'm basically saying as a coach is, okay, guys, here's the shots I'm looking for. I want Steve Nash to get a three or a layup or a floater in the lane, or I want Joe Johnson to get a three, or I want Amari to get a dunk. Those are basically what I'm trying to do on every set. And then if none of those work for 24 seconds, then, I'm going to take Leandro Barbosa shooting, an 18-footer. Fine. Live with that, right? Or a Leandro Barbosa 3 or something like that, right? That's basically what I'm saying is that, but the Lakers offense, particularly under the coaches who don't seem to have like any influence with Kobe Bryant, are saying, okay, the first shot I want to get is like an isolation play with Kobe because he's one of the greatest of all time. It's like, okay, I don't give a shit if he's one of the greatest of all time. Do you really want like a 45 to 55% sort of shot to be your offense's like zen, your best of both worlds, your like best possible outcome is this shot? That's crazy, right? You should be saying, okay, if I had my way, I'm gonna get Dwight Howard dunk. If I can't get a Dwight Howard dunk, then I'm gonna get Steve Nash shooting a three or a floater in the lane. If I can't get that, I want to get Kobe shooting or a layup or getting like a something around the elbow. And if I can't get that, we'll take Ron Artest shooting a three. I mean, let's go from best possible outcome first and then see what the defense gives us from there. And instead, their approach seemed to be, well, Kobe's a Hall of Famer and I don't really know how to coach him, so I'm just going to give him the ball and see what he does.
So, by the way, it doesn't help us all. It doesn't help us at all because this is the standard ding against the quants that just don't get it. But I do love watching your mind work because you've done this a few times where you do the computer science-y decision tree or flow chart for like how to coach basketball or what to do. And I love your flow charts. Like one of your very first flow charts you did was like George Carl. I think you did one on
that was Crib.
Was it Flip Saunders with Kevin Love or was it McHale?
Sorry,
no, that was
Kurt Rambis and Kevin Love was entirely from Canis Hoopus.
Rambis. Okay.
And I cribbed that one. I just basically cheated from that one to make the George Karl Kenneth Faried decision chart, which was basically all outcomes led to bench Kevin Faried.
But yeah, I mean, I love exactly, and I love watching a decision tree, and that is funny because it always makes me laugh how much kind of pushback quants get in sports. But it's like the decision tree, what you're saying, is actually where it applies very, very rationally. Like things like game theory. This is one reason I actually have a lot of respect for gamblers. Even gamblers I disagree with on some stats when it comes to their analysis of sports because they're looking at it like that. They're going, okay, I'm looking to get, 60% of the time I want a 50% shot, 30% of the time I want a 55% shot, and then, 10% of the time I'll take that 35% shot, right? They're trying to maximize that, whereas most coaches use the decision tree you're saying, which is get it to the best guy because he's the best guy.
Yeah, I mean, like at the end of the day, the 20-footer is the shot that the defense will always give you, right? I'd say always because there comes a time, maybe when the shot clock hits about 18 or 19, now defenses start to sniff the 24-second violation. They start to get excited about it. They start to become, they become like fielders behind a pitcher trying to get a no-hitter. They're going to try extra hard. So that's not always going to be, they're not always going to get that shot. But for the most part, the shot that I see so many NBA players take at 5 seconds, 6, 7 seconds into the shot clock is exactly the shot that the defense would always give them anyway. And you didn't even try to get a better shot before you took that shot. And I see that so often with players like Kobe and Melo and they're actually the worst practitioners of them. So I'm so bad that I'm struggling to think of other players that do this. And it's like, if those were normal players taking that shots, coaches would be telling their teams, they'd be saying, look, we can always get that shot. Stop settling for that shot. Try to get the better shot first. And then that shot's still there if we can't. But because these players get this reputation, it's like the rules no longer apply to them. And it's sort of this vicious circle too. Like, Melo has this reputation as a guy who can score at will, and really he's a guy that's willing to shoot within 5, 6 seconds of the shot clock at will. And so that tends to lead to lots of points for him, even though it doesn't lead to lots of points for his team.
Well, also one thing, so this came up in the comments section, and kind of I'll let it in because it kind of applies. So like, for instance, we talk Chris Paul and shooting and all that jazz. And one thing you can notice actually is if you look at Chris Paul from 10 to 16 feet, he's actually quite good as a mid-range shooter. But I love the Kobe metaphor you made, or just the best, we'll settle for a good shot, but I want a great shot. If you look at Chris Paul from 10 to 16 feet and compare that with his shooting from 0 to 3 feet, where he does most of his shooting, or from 3-point, it's just not the same. It's a good shot, but it's not as good. So one thing that kind of bugs me when people bring up good mid-range shooters is they do that. They go, Kobe Bryant is a very good mid-range shooter. And you go, that's great. You're right. He's better than 90% of the league at it, 95. And in his prime, I don't know how good, because this last season was terrible. But, Kobe Bryant and Steve Nash too, right? We're probably some of the best in the league at this shot. It doesn't matter how good you are at that shot. It's just not going to compare to those great shots you want to get. And the players I want on my team are the players that are going to try and maximize those great shots.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's a good mid-range shooter, but that's a skill that isn't in high demand.
All right. And okay, so, by the way, go ahead.
I hate to play the host now, but look, I think we've now gone on further than we wanted.
Well, no, it happens.
Suddenly we're not talking about Steve Nash anymore. Yeah. How does this?
We're not talking Steve Nash. We got down. I think I want to end one last. I want to give, I guess, the Bull Durham Award, because we love this clip from Bull Durham. We've played on previous shows, which is about the impact of really small things. The exact example in the clip is you can get 25 more hits in a baseball season. It turns you from a good player to a great player in the eyes of the stats. And Steve Nash, this was an article I wrote on him, so I'd be remiss if I didn't end our section on Steve Nash talking this. If you look at Steve Nash, the things that made him great were basically like he got 0.4 more three-point attempts a game. And I may be getting these numbers wrong, by the way. I don't have time to look up the article. 0.4 more three-point attempts a game than the average point guard. And then he made, a higher percentage of them even than the average point guard. So it was these little things that basically were indiscernible on a game-to-game level. It's really easy to notice 25 points out of Kobe every game. It's really hard to go into a game and say, did you notice that Steve Nash made 0.1 more three-pointers than we would have expected a point guard to make that game? But that was his game, and that's what he did his whole career. I wrote an article for Jeremy Britton back in the day about why he went from, this okay fringe lottery player to being one of the best ever. And he made these small tweaks. And that great Grantland article you pointed at, I think, he tweaked his game to be like, I'm going to skim these marginal edges on all these things, on shooting percentages, on passing, etc. And that's going to make my game amazing. And, if there's a player that encapsulates the importance of the box score, because you can't notice that stuff game to game, it's Steve Nash. All right. So, by the way, the hedge I tried to make earlier and we didn't get to was actually going to talk about Noel. Now, one of the interesting things, last week we had Lane Vasher on the show, who's done a lot of stuff modeling NBA draft prospects. And the best draft prospect in recent time, and in fact, almost across all time, is Anthony Davis. He's one of the most ridiculous draft prospects ever. And as anyone who listens to the show knows, Patrick thinks Anthony Davis is the MVP this season. Hard to disagree with that.
Starting to lean towards Russell Westbrook, but that's
all right. We actually did talk him a little at the top, so we'll see if he comes at the end, because you're right. I did let us get off track on Steve Nash, but a player that was right behind him on Lane's list as well was actually Nerlens Noel. By the way, normally I like to recap the polls. We do a poll every week on the show. Last week's poll, we asked about the top prospect from this year's draft, who's going to be Karl Towns. It was originally a little more of a fight between if you'd want to take Karl Towns or the field. Karl Towns, I'm willing to bet after that first game in the NCAA tournament, definitely gave him the edge. But Karl Towns is the de facto. Everybody who reads the site says pick Karl Towns in this draft. And Karl Towns is on a unique list with players like Anthony Davis, and the player we want to talk, Nerlens Noel. So I'm actually going to let you go on that, Patrick, because every week you kind of send a status update on what the heck he's doing. And he had a slow start this season, but geez.
Yeah, so it's funny. On the surface of it, you might go to our site and you look at our stats and you'd be like, why does Patrick think Nerlens Noel deserves any consideration for Rookie of the Year? Because he's like barely an average NBA player on the season. His points over par per 48 is like minus 0.3 or something like that. But then what you have to think about is that Nerlens Noel was absolutely god awful in November and pretty bad in December as well. He looked horrible out there. He couldn't score. He couldn't rebound. He was blocking some shots and getting some steals, but he just he basically just kind of was getting pushed out of the way and wasn't rebounding very well. However, since about the new year, it's like something has clicked for Nerlens Noel, and he's really doing some incredibly unique things. Not offensively. Offensively, he's still a bit of a train wreck, but he reins that in by basically not shooting too much. I remain convinced that the shots he does take are the ones that Brett Brown is like urging him on to take. But he's not a selfish player. He's not chucking up shots, even though he's playing for the team. Where that would totally fly if he wanted to do that. And what's interesting about him is that, and I think everyone's playing this game of, who's the last. Okay, wait, let me stop for a second. Let me say that there is absolutely zero chance, no chance whatsoever that Nerlens Noel will win the Rookie of the Year. Andrew Wiggins is going to win that award, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. If you look back in the history of time, like the number one pick leading the league in scoring is almost always a sure bet to win. In fact, the last time it did not happen was when Glenn Robinson lost the award to Jason Kidd, and that was the year that Jason Kidd had like 4 triple doubles and like was among the league leaders in both assists and steals.
That was a cheat code too, because that was a tie between Jason Kidd and.
Was it a tie?
Hill. It was a tie between.
No, not Grant Hill. Glenn Robinson was the number one pick, right?
But what I'm saying
Glenn
is
Robinson led all rookies in scoring.
But I'm saying the Rookie of the Year was a tie. The voting was a tie between Jason Kidd and Grant Hill.
Yeah, okay. All I'm saying is that's the last time that the number one overall pick also led all rookies in scoring and didn't win it, right? And I think you go back further, like you have to go back pretty far. The number one pick basically has a big edge, and if the number one pick also leads all rookies in scoring, it's pretty much a shoe-in for them, unless there's heavy competition, like in the case of Jason Kidd and Grant Hill. I think Derrick Rose won it. Like, even if you eliminate the whole number one pick thing, like the one who has the most points per game almost always wins. Like Derrick Rose was an exception, but he was pretty close. OJ Mayo, I think, scored slightly more points per game than Derrick Rose, and. So basically all I'm saying is that there's just no way in hell Andrew Wiggins is going to not get this number one. There's no way in hell he's not going to win Rookie of the Year, especially because, Noel started the year so poorly. So did Andrew Wiggins, by the way, but nobody seems to know that because he was still putting up points per game. So anyway, get back to the topic at hand. It's not that I think he could win this, but it's, do I think he deserves to be, like, do we deserve to talk about it? Does this deserve to be this kind of thing where in 3 years we look back and we say, wow, Nerlens Noel got kind of ripped off. He should have been the Rookie of the Year. And I think there's a very good argument to be made for that, because if you look at the splits and how he has done since about the 1st of January, he's been absolutely dominant because of his amazing defensive numbers, his incredible knack for getting blocks, steals, and assists.
So fun stat there. I don't quite have it. I apologize because I'm now looking up Andrew Wiggins stats. But Nerlens Noel has gone almost 2 months without having a game with a block.
Yeah, and here's a fun thing. So because everyone loves to do this with Nerlens Noel, especially if I watch a lot of Sixers games, so like you can see this on almost every broadcast. They talk about like Nerlens Noel is the first guy to get 5 blocks, 4 assists, 3 steals, and 10 points since Hakeem Olajuwon and blah 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 blah. Like there's all this like amazing like reference of trying to find comps for what Nerlens Noel is doing, and it's really interesting because if you look at this combination of blocks, steals, and assists, the comps are very, very, very narrow. In fact, I had to like narrow things down. So if you look at just with rookies who have had more than 2.5 blocks, assists, and steals per 48, there's 2 people on that list. And one's a guy I've never heard of. What's that guy's name, Dre?
Yeah, okay. So this was incredible. So Patrick, like this player that you have found,
Carey Scurry. Who the Carey Scurry.
Anybody out there that knows the deal, because this is a player that for Utah in 1985, 1986 goes in, doesn't play full minutes, only plays about 1,200 minutes. I'm looking at his basketball reference page. Wasn't a great shooter, but like you were saying, oh man, he puts up 2.7 blocks per 48 minutes. Oh, by the way, interesting. Basketball Reference has followed the lead. They've gone per 48 instead of per 36. Awesome.
Oh, and it's a thing you can do in the search.
Oh, awesome. Oh, okay. I like that. Okay. So he's got 2.7 blocks per 48, 3.2 steals per 48. You look at his wins produced or points over par numbers. He was a good player there. And he stayed good. But what happened is year to year, his minutes dropped in the NBA. He only lasted 3 seasons. Then he was a journeyman the rest of his year around Light Grease, etc. And so does anybody know? Because this person, like you're saying, Patrick, was remarkable. And I have no idea what happened because, as you're saying,
this is before people, this is like before basic stats, much less analytic stats. So nobody seemed to kind of recognize how good this guy was.
And we'll have to see if he keeps it up. But I mean,
so I'm asking myself, okay, so maybe is it just rookies or is it? And so I expanded. I'm like, okay, let's try to find rookies with what Nerlens Noel is doing is 3 blocks per 48, 2 steals, and 2 assists. And that list is pretty short. That's David Robinson, Vlade Divac, Andrei Kirilenko, Kurt Rambis, and Nerlens Noel. Those are the rookies who have done that. So and I think that those give you pretty good comps because other than the Admiral and Vlade, those are all pretty like defensive oriented guys, right? Those aren't necessarily offensive juggernauts. But it's very interesting that we're looking at assists here because Noel's actually a really good passer. So then I'm like, okay, so that's rookies. Let's talk about players. So let's look at the all-time seasons of players with more than 2.5 blocks, assists, and steals per 48. There's 13 seasons on that list, and 4 of them are Hakeem Olajuwon. One is David Robinson. Then there's Sean Kemp. Then there's Andrei Kirilenko. And then there's this guy you may have heard of called Bobby Jones who did it twice. It's basically a list of, extremely like outlier seasons. And so this is the point where I'm like, wow, this is kind of crazy. I have to narrow down these numbers to try to get something more realistic because basically no one ever does this. So I narrowed it down to greater than or equal to 3 blocks and 2 assists and 2 steals per 48 minutes. And what you get when you do that is a hell of a lot of Hakeem Olajuwon and David Robinson and Andrei Kirilenko. Kareem's on the list only once because, as you mentioned before, the NBA wasn't tracking blocks until 1974.
I think 74. Yeah, I think 74 for. I'm trying to remember. I think there was some weird rebound schism between 74 and 78. But yeah, it was either 74.
Kareem might not be on this list very much after all because, again, there's just not many big men who get 2 steals per 48. There's just guys who are 7 feet tall that get 2 steals per 48. There just aren't that many of them. Right? So it's really a big outlier stat. And Noel's averaging 2.5. It's kind of amazing. And so basically what I'm saying is that from a defensive perspective, Noel is already elite with a capital E, and he's 20 years old. So there's a lot of potential for this guy, but it's definitely something that I think deserves some consideration, at least from the more analytic-minded folks in terms of the Rookie of the Year conversation. We all know he's not going to win it, but
so can I ask something to either you or the crowd, because I haven't followed Philadelphia maybe as closely as I should have. I do know it's been a train wreck at point guard, at least in terms of like Isaiah Cannon and then trades. Like, do they have any ball distributors at all on that team? Because this is one of those, we talk about stats that are kind of consistent year to year and valuable, and Noel is crushing those. And we talk stats that get a little harder to look at. And basically, shooting efficiency is the key one, because things like the offensive scheme you run, the Morey ball, lots of threes and lots of layups, that's really important. Or having a player like Steve Nash that passes the ball a lot is really important. Assists really, really help shooting efficiency. So if the 76ers can find their way into a point guard that can do something.
That is their big problem. All of their point guards have been terrible, including Michael Carter-Williams when he was playing there. I mean, Michael Carter-Williams was just shooting horrifically, and his assists were all right. He was a good ball distributor, but he was a terrible, terrible, terrible shooter. And I don't know why, but for some reason all of Philadelphia's point guards, including Michael Carter-Williams, have all felt the need to just get as many shots as they can in the air, even though none of them are good shooters. So you got like Tony Roten was awful. Isaiah Cannon is pretty awful. Ish Smith is He's pretty awful too, actually. But I mean, they just really haven't had anything at point guard. But
And even look
and
at
see,
okay,
that's the
so
thing is like next year, what they have, if the Lakers win a few games, they might have two top five picks in this draft. Sorry, they won't have a top. Like if the Lakers win a few games, they might have two top 10 picks. Um, I don't think that they should draft for need yet. I think they still should be taking the best, but it's very likely that that the best player available will just happen to be a point guard when they pick, namely D'Angelo Russell, right?
that could be the case. And what I was going to
I mean,
say,
Carl Towns and Okafor
yeah,
are
he's
probably
not going
number
to
one
be.
and number two, and beyond that, who knows? So depending on where the Sixers pick lands, it's very likely that they could be looking at a board where Russell is the best player available and happens to be there totally the position that they need as well. And like I said, I think it was last week we talked about, when do we start evaluating Daryl Morey on whether or not he can put a winning team together as opposed to just
Hinkie, I think you
collect.
mean, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Sam
No
Hinkie.
problem.
When do we switch from okay, how good is he at stockpiling picks to how good is he at making a roster that wins games? And I think the answer is next year because Noel is definitely an elite defender, and if Joel Embiid is half the player that we sort of think he is, that's already sort of a functioning front court. You have a team that can win 30 games there without really needing too much extra support. And you've got 5 draft picks or something. I think they have something like 5 first-round picks, depending on how all the protection shakes out, and a boatload of second-round picks. At some point, you can turn those into players that can actually win games for you, and you wouldn't have to spend that much money on them. So I think next year is when the clock starts ticking. Like next year, if you're a 76ers fan, you have to be thinking, I want this team to win 25 to 30 games. If not, I feel really disappointed. And that's one of the reasons I strongly suspect, unless I haven't really been reading the news, because Noel got like sort of poked in his eye in the Timberwolves game, which is one of the reasons, not the Timberwolves game, the Lakers game, which is might be one of the reasons the Lakers won that game, because Noel was a non-factor. So there's a question of, okay, do the 76ers pull the deal where they're like, okay, let's have Noel sit out the rest of the season to protect that asset. If they don't do that, this team could still win 20 games because Noel is that good and just keeps you in
Oh, and I
games
forgot
by
to check.
virtue of
Have
his
they hit the
defense.
over? Because they're like a couple
Oh
games
yeah,
ahead
I've
of.
already ka-chinged that. They're at
Oh,
17.
nice. There we go.
They're at 17 and look at their schedule. I mean, take a look at their schedule. They play the Lakers again. They play, I think,
Oh,
they play a lot of teams that they could win 3 more games easily, right? Um, and so you look at that, and you look at that progression from Noah, and then you add Embiid to it next year. And let's not get crazy on Embiid. Let's not assume he's like the next coming of Patrick Ewing. But if he's just like an average big man, an average NBA big man, you suddenly are adding 3-4 wins there too. And all you got to do now is just get some competent NBA level talent at the wing positions and the point guard especially, and you have a 30 to 35 win team, which means if you wanted to spend just a little bit of money next year, you can have a playoff team in the East, right?
oh,
So,
absolutely.
I mean, and to me, there's not much point in continuing the tankathon, so to speak. And by that, I don't mean I've always maintained that Philadelphia isn't trying to lose games on purpose. It's just that Philadelphia is trying to not spend any money on purpose, right? Um, because clearly, if they were trying to lose games on purpose, Noel would not be playing like the last. He would have been
Yeah,
sitting a
you would
lot more,
just
and
sit.
he's collecting it, a boatload of minutes, right? They're clearly trying to, you know, evaluate as much as they improve his game, use this time to improve his game, and he's already a fantastic defender. So
Well, I mean, to what you just said, and by the way, I apologize. I'll have to listen when the audio comes up to see if you can hear me clicking a lot. Patrick, I'm going to have to give you some level of credit this show because you have picked the little part of my brain that it's kind of OCD-ish where you've brought up so many interesting stats. The player who I've already forgotten the name, I don't want to say because I messed up the pronunciation like 5 times in the pre-show. But the comp you found in Noel from the 1985-1986 Jazz these kind of stats that you've got me running around. So you had me running around looking up stats while you were talking, and it's like I'm trying to listen to you. I'm trying to look up stats. I kind of want to say some stuff, but then I also want to find the stats, and you're going on a tear. But one interesting note on Patrick Ewing, because when you brought up, you said Embiid being the next coming of Patrick Ewing. Patrick Ewing wasn't actually that great his first 2 seasons. I seem to have recalled that from looking up in the day. He didn't actually play that hot his first 2 seasons. He had some injury issues. He didn't like play full minutes. It wasn't until his third year. So actually, that for Embiid,
but when you say wasn't that great, what do you mean? Like,
okay, points over par. So for those of you listening to the show that don't happen to know this is full game with an average team against an average team. What edge you'd get? Negative 1.2 points over par his rookie season. He actually regressed his sophomore season, negative 1.4 points over par. And then in his third season,
actually a lot worse than I thought. Yeah,
I know. And then in his third season, boom, he picks it up. That's when he's star, and he's getting 3+ points a game every year for most of his career, except for injuries. And then the irony is, when the Knicks were actually winning when the Knicks were like going to finals, the sad part about those teams is that Ewing was actually kind of hurting them there. And if those teams had, if the Knicks had like let go of Ewing in like '93 when he still had trade value and traded for someone good, and kept the great players. I think they had Mark Jackson and some other good players. They might have done a little better. It's one of those rough things where
they had the perennially underrated Chris Dudley.
Oh yeah. And then Anthony Mason, who we talked a few shows back. Like, I mean, they had all these great players that no one appreciated. It's one of those rough things where it's during the '80s, Patrick Ewing is why the Knicks were relevant. And I don't want to get too much off track there. But so in terms of the 76ers next year, even for a point guard, I think you're right in not needing to draft for need. I think I'm hoping the Nuggets, they're the team I can't stop getting myself reinvested in. They
it's
fired
interesting
Shaw.
because unlike me, you actually live in a place that has an NBA team now. So like me, like I kind of am stuck a little bit on the Timberwolves, not really that much, don't care that much because I can't for sanitary reasons.
Sanitary reasons.
Sanity reasons. But I don't. It's like if some billionaire went out and acquired the Atlanta Hawks, for instance, and moved them to Seattle, I would instantly become a Seattle fan. At least until such point as it looked like they were never ever going to figure it out. But I don't have that option, and I mean, there's nothing here. You, however, have the Bucks.
Well, I that's funny. It makes it sound like the money, but yeah, actually. So the thing is, I went from living close to Denver, where the Nuggets were 30 minutes away from me, to moving to Appleton, Wisconsin, which is like an hour and a half out of Wisconsin or out of Milwaukee. And it actually turns out Chicago's not that far away either. So it's kind of funny where it's like when we talk about your home team and people do the state thing, people kind of miss that like states are big. And, even like in Utah, right? There are people who live in Utah. They're like, the Utah Jazz are your home team. And you're like, they're 5 hours. Like Dave Barry, I've done that before. I'm going to be going through Salt Lake City at some point on a leg of a trip. And I was like, I'm going to be in Salt Lake City for a couple hours. Maybe we can see each other. And he's like, well, unless it's, he's like, it's 3 hours away from Cedar Rapids. I think that's where he lives. And I was like, I don't know. Could I drive there in 15 minutes? He's like, well, plus or minus 3 hours. So anyway, I mean, I haven't quite jumped onto the Bucks yet, but what I was going to say about the Nuggets is like Ty Lawson, when everything looked like it was going to heck in the trade deadline, there are potential point guards that could help the 76ers that I think they're actually savvy enough when it comes to trades, right? This is the team that is like traded. We were mad impressed for a while with the 76ers when they were like, let's give Spencer Hawes and let's get second-round picks for this guy. And you're like, are you kidding me? Like, you actually got picked. Just letting that guy go is a win for you, and you got picks. So I could buy that if, Embiid looks strong, Noel comes back healthy, and, they've got a few other guys on the team that look like they have strength. They just need a point guard because the last stat I was looking up when we were talking, the 76ers do not have a player with more than 8 assists per 48 minutes that does not also have more than 5 turnovers per 48 minutes. They have some of the worst assist to turnover ratio. So I think next year they don't need to draft it, but if they get a guard and Noel shows improvement and Embiid can even just Patrick Ewing his rookie season, I think you're right. This is a playoff team.
Yeah. All right. Well, it depends on whether or not they're going to try.
And I think to your point, and I think just based on what we've seen out of Noel, so barring health, because that's always the big thing, I think they've shown they're in a position where they don't have an excuse not to try because they can make the playoffs with the team. They can likely make the playoffs with the team they'll have next season. All
And
right,
let's not forget Thomas Robinson, who's actually looked really great in a Sixer uniform.
that man, I still can't believe the Blazers and the Nuggets let him go. I can't believe that.
Yeah, I don't understand. Like, why are they cutting? It's this guy was pretty poor his rookie season, but then he got better his next year, and then he was still getting better this year, and then they cut him. And he's already kind of almost got as many minutes in the 13 games he's been in Philadelphia as he had in Portland. And he's looking great. And what's funny is when he got claimed off waivers, everybody was like, wait, why is Philadelphia doing this? And I'm like, what do you mean? Why is Philadelphia is not trying to get, why wouldn't they grab a rookie off waivers like that? It doesn't make, he's exactly the kind of player they should be grabbing. He's still in year 3. Yeah, he's in year 3 of a rookie year, meaning he's got one more year left next year, and he looks great. So he's essentially a cheap power forward who turns out to be pretty good at power forward things like rebounding.
Yeah, pretty much they've got the 76ers next year. We'll have to wait and see what they do. Could have a case of the Jazz syndrome, which is you have a bunch of really good bigs, no guards, and you're going to need to get at least a guard because the Jazz showed us.
They already have that syndrome right now. If you just look at Kirilenko and Robinson, they have 2 pretty decent bigs, and they have no guards. They're and even Furkan Aldemir looks pretty good in the limited time he's been playing, right? And they don't have any guards. Hollis Thompson is a pretty good guy, but he's a 3-and-D guy, right? He's not a ball handler, and that's it. They really desperately need some ball handlers.
All right. And so I don't have a clever segue to the end, but the show actually went the full hour. It was hilarious when we were talking pre-show. I was like, maybe we'll just go 30 minutes because, like I said, I was traveling. It should be very apparent that I didn't work on a script this week because normally
none of us really did. We just kind of roll with the punches.
Yeah, we talk back and forth normally, and we can see what happens when we don't work with a script, which is Patrick says little things, and I'm like, I've got to look that up. I was like, I know I've got to look up Patrick Ewing right now. I've got to look up how Andrew Wiggins. Something we'll have to talk future because Andrew Wiggins and both Noel did this, where they started really poorly, had this amazing jump, and you're like, wow, they look for real. But Noel has kept it up. Wiggins has gone down. We'll have to save that for a future show. But I'm going to just take us into shout outs. I have one legitimate shout out to a person, a team, I guess. And then I'm going to steal one from you, Patrick, if you don't use it. But do either you or Brian have any shout outs? Because I want to collect myself before mine.
I want to give a shout out to the Oklahoma City Thunder media, which apparently they need some love because they're not getting any from the Oklahoma City Thunder. The guys who cover that team, apparently, there was an article in Grantland about this, about how the team is one of those extremely rigidly controlling teams that won't let any reporters talk to any players without PR people there, and they don't give any access to the players in any official capacity and things like that. And it's got to be a rough gig covering that team. So anyway, here's my shout out / empathy vote for you guys. Royce,
and I mean, it's I was going to say, as far as I can tell, some of the writers and whatnot have done some great stuff. That's a great team to, it makes us sad. The Knicks are kind of the opposite, where it's like they have great writers, but a horrible team. But it kind of sucks. You've got great writers and a good team, and then you still feel kind of bad for a lot of reasons. Anybody out of you, Brian?
Well, I do have a few notes on Steve Nash.
I'm not hearing anything from Brian.
Brian must be on mute.
All right,
is that
I'm
right?
just going to go with the one you brought up because this guy was amazing. I'm going to butcher his pronunciation, but I think it's Carey Scurry. I think that's how you say it. I probably got it completely wrong. Carey, if you watch the show, chime in and let me know. You totally need to mark eating this up. Another Utah player that did this to me. But, oh my goodness, this just diamond in the rough in the middle of the 80s in the NBA. I can't believe you found a player like this, Patrick. This is one of the most fun things for me. I love it when you find players like this on Basketball Reference Queries. especially when I haven't heard of them. That's what makes it the most fun.
I need to, get my own website to the point where we can search players like that.
Well, actually, I do that a lot I do a lot of the career comps and stuff on that and have fun with the box score geeks comparison engine. That is something we this show brought to you by the Boxscore Geeks comparison engine. Click on tools at the top. Just do it. I swear it's one of the best tools on the web. I know not enough people know about it, but it is so much fun. You can compare players season to season or across careers. It's a lot of fun to do. Go on right now, look up career and compare Noel to Carey Scurry. And like I said, I'm probably getting that wrong, but an amazing player. I'll include it in the show notes. And the other people I want to give a shout out to is I was in Vegas traveling. That's why script wasn't ready. That's why I was running all over the place this show. Thanks for putting up with me, Patrick.
No problem.
But I got to see them live. I got to see Penn and Teller live. I actually got to get up on the stage at one point where they made they made a cow dressed as an elephant disappear. And what they did is they got a group of people to surround the cow, right? So, and all hold hands so that we could verify that they didn't like whisk it really quickly back or left or whatever. No idea how they did it, but it's an amazing show. And I'm going to guess the personality of the people that watch this, that kind of like skepticalness, looking at the numbers more, probably a little, in terms of political leaning, a little interesting, maybe a little more libertarian. It's the perfect show for that.
Oh, yeah. They're the thinking men's magicians for sure.
They were awesome. While they're doing all the magic tricks, they're saying, this is a trick. This isn't, we're doing this through trickery. It's a very interesting thing to go where you're like, we are going to make it very apparent that we are tricking you, but we are not trying to lie about the trickery. We're not trying to say we're doing something amazing. We're just going to say you're not going to know how we did it. And they're amazing at that. And then they've been on the strip forever. I know they've got to be rich, but after the show, they actually hung around right outside the lobby and were waiting around it was amazing. Actually, Teller was waiting around for people to take pictures with him. I've got a picture with myself with Teller, and he takes the selfie. So you give him your phone, he takes a selfie with you to make sure you get a good photo. They were both really just amazing, letting the fans take pictures of them. They don't have to do that. So it was an amazing show. They're amazing people. Got to give them a shout out. I'll have to see at some point. There's a great monologue from a talk I heard from Teller, or Penn, not Teller. Teller does talk, just not a lot publicly. A great talk from Penn that I'm going to have to see if I can work into a basketball article, because it's got some great thinking stuff there, but it's like one degree removed from directly sports. But I do like so I'll see if I can work that out. But anyway, that's my shout out. That's what I got. And I'm going to assume, Brian, because you've been silent, that you don't have any shout outs. You hate
No, I'm unmuted now, I think. Can you guys hear me?
We can. So are you going to end the show just hating the internet, not appreciating anybody out there? Or do you have a shout out last second?
Oh, I've got some notes for Steve Nash, actually. One thing that I brought up when you guys were talking about it earlier, in fact, was that you can put Dirk Nowitzki into the category of people that thinks he's unathletic. And there's a kind of a funny USA Today article about that, so check that out. And his final saying he was retiring was, I don't want to say it was sad, but you could tell that he was not ready to hang him up, man. That was one of those guys who he had to totally break down physically before he retired. So impressive willpower for Steve Nash. And I got one more thing about Nash too. Third thing, got to come in threes. The player who's most currently like him anyway, that I'm hearing a lot of people say, not statistically of course, just style and all that, is our boy here, Stephen Curry. He throws those behind the back flashy passes, maybe to some effect in game, maybe it's just flash. I don't know. He shoots a lot of threes. Not quite the assist to turnover ratio of guys like Nash and Stockton, but that's the heir apparent.
Definitely another player who creates those passing opportunities because he's such a great scorer.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. And I'm more than fine with that. And I think that's a good torch to pass to. I hope Curry don't get injured. Stick around. Stay around for a while. I can only handle so many James Harden and Carmelo Anthony in the league. All right, so with that, we're at the end of our show. If you happen to find this show not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. If you haven't already, subscribe to the show. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher as The Boxscore Geeks Show. I host this show on my YouTube channel, so channel Nerd Numbers. You can find The Boxscore Geeks Show. We got a playlist. We update it every week. If you've got any questions, leave them for the hashtag BSG Show. And yeah, we set our Twitter handles at the start of the show, so if you forgot them, you have to listen to the show again. But we love feedback, interaction. We had a lot of you ask for Noel, so that's why we talked him this week. So we love hearing from you. And with that, we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye, everyone.